Chapter 1. The New Kid. Damien's day was as predictable as always, full of duties and expectations. As the perfect altar boy, his life revolved around the church, academic excellence, and meeting his family's high standards. He walked out of school with a book in his hand, heading for the church. He never strayed from his routine, until he bumped into Jackson. Jackson was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, the rebellious smirk on his face enough to make Damien's heart skip. "Watch where you're going, Saint," Jackson said, eyes scanning him with a mix of mockery and curiosity. Damien stammered, trying to ignore the way his heart raced, and stepped back, avoiding Jackson's gaze. "Sorry," he muttered, feeling the weight of his perfect, sheltered life pressing in on him. Jackson tilted his head, clearly amused by the shy reaction. "You've got that I'm too good for this vibe," he remarked, his voice low, teasing. Damien blinked, trying to recover his composure. "I'm not. You're not what?" "A saint," Jackson interrupted with a grin. Damien flushed, unwilling to admit how much Jackson's words stung. "I have responsibilities," he muttered, a vague excuse. Jackson took a step closer, his presence overwhelming. "Yeah, I get it. You're the golden boy, always doing what's expected," Jackson said, his voice almost too soft, as if he could see right through Damien. "But tell me, do you ever do something just because you want to?" Damien's breath caught in his throat. Jackson's question lingered, a challenge he wasn't sure how to answer. For a moment, their eyes locked, and something passed between them. Tension, attraction, confusion. But Jackson was already walking away, throwing over his shoulder, "Think about it, Saint." Damien stood frozen, feeling both trapped and intrigued. Chapter 2. Unlikely Encounters. Days passed since their encounter, and Damien tried to focus on his routine, but the memory of Jackson lingered. He found himself thinking about the way Jackson had looked at him. His teasing smile, the way his words had both challenged and intrigued him. It was wrong. Damien knew it was wrong to think about someone like Jackson, a troublemaker, someone who had no respect for the rules. But then, at school, it happened again. Jackson appeared by his locker, his presence undeniable. "Saint, still avoiding me?" Jackson's grin was mischievous, and Damien could feel the heat rising in his cheeks. "I'm not avoiding you," he muttered, shifting uncomfortably as Jackson leaned in closer. "You look like you are," Jackson said, his voice playful, yet tinged with something else, something Damien couldn't name. Damien swallowed hard, his heart racing. "I have things to do." But Jackson wasn't buying it. "Things to do, huh? Let me guess, church, homework, perfect life." His voice was laced with sarcasm. Damien clenched his jaw. "It's not like that," he replied quickly, but his voice betrayed him. There was a tremble of uncertainty there that he hadn't meant to reveal. Jackson took a step back, eyes twinkling with amusement. "You know, you could loosen up a bit. Life's more fun when you break the rules now and then." He winked, and Damien felt a jolt of excitement mixed with a sense of guilt. He couldn't explain it, but every interaction with Jackson made him question everything he thought he knew about himself. Damien didn't want to feel this way, but there was something undeniable in Jackson's challenge. "I'm not like you," he said softly, but Jackson just shrugged, grinning. "Maybe not yet." Chapter 3. The Moment of Truth. Damien didn't want to admit it, but he couldn't stop thinking about Jackson. The teasing, the challenge, the undeniable pull. It was messing with his head. So when Jackson showed up at the church later that week, leaning casually against the old oak tree outside, Damien felt his stomach twist. Jackson smirked as he saw him approach, arms crossed over his chest. "You don't have to look so surprised, Saint. I come to places like this all the time." "What, you think I'm some sort of heathen?" Damien hesitated, staring at him. I thought you didn't care about this kind of thing," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Jackson's smile softened, almost teasing. "I don't, but it's funny watching you squirm. Plus, it's got that effect on you, doesn't it?" Damien felt heat rising in his chest, his breath catching. Before he could respond, Jackson pushed himself off the tree and walked closer, his presence overwhelming. "Come on." "I dare you," Jackson said, his voice low but playful. You can't tell me you don't want to see what's beyond the walls of this place. There was a challenge in his eyes, daring Damien to break free, to let go of everything he'd known. Without thinking, Damien agreed. He followed Jackson to the party that night, a place filled with wild music and people who didn't care about rules or reputations. For the first time, Damien felt like he was part of something he never knew existed. Jackson didn't leave his side, and for a moment, it felt like the world around them disappeared. But as the night wore on, and the music pulsed in the air, Damien's pulse quickened, his body reacting to Jackson's nearness. When they found themselves alone in a quieter corner, everything shifted. Jackson leaned in, his lips brushing against Damien's ear. "You're not as innocent as you look," he whispered. Damien's heart skipped a beat. Chapter 4. The Struggle. The kiss had been quick, too quick, but it lingered in Damien's mind for days after. Every time he tried to focus, to go back to his routine, his thoughts kept returning to Jackson. He tried to convince himself it was a mistake, a one-time thing driven by the thrill of the moment. But Jackson wasn't letting it go. He started showing up at church, standing just far enough to catch Damien's eye. It was maddening. "Still pretending like you don't want this?" Jackson would taunt, his voice playful but never truly innocent. Damien's resolve was crumbling. He couldn't focus in class, couldn't keep his mind off Jackson's smirk, the way his touch had made him feel. But every time he thought about what had happened, guilt gnawed at him. His family, his faith, everything he believed in, it all felt so far away, like a life he wasn't sure he belonged to anymore. At school, Jackson took every opportunity to push Damien further. "What's the matter, Saint?" "Too perfect for me," he would tease, his words playful but carrying an edge that made Damien's heart race. But every time Damien pulled away, Jackson would only get closer, and somehow, that only made him want to stay. "I can't do this," Damien said one day, his voice strained. "You're trouble." Jackson's grin softened, and for the first time, Damien saw a glimpse of vulnerability in his eyes. "Maybe," Jackson admitted, stepping closer, "but I think you're the one who needs to figure out if you want out of this cage you've built for yourself." The words hit Damien harder than he expected. Was he really trapped, or was it just fear holding him back? Chapter 5. Forbidden Feelings. The moments between them became more intense, more frequent. Damien found himself seeking out Jackson, unable to resist the pull. They would meet in secret, quiet spots behind school buildings, the corner of a coffee shop where no one would see them. It was dangerous, reckless even, but it felt real. Damien's heart pounded in his chest every time he saw Jackson. The way he looked at him, like he could see straight through him, made him shiver. One evening, as they sat on the steps of a secluded alleyway, Jackson turned to him with a soft smile. "You've got it bad, haven't you?" Damien tried to hide the heat creeping up his neck. "I'm not," he started, but Jackson cut him off. "You don't have to lie to me, Saint," Jackson said softly, his voice teasing, but there was something else there. Something deeper. "I know exactly what I'm doing to you." The words hung in the air, thick with unspoken truth. Damien's breath caught as Jackson leaned closer, his lips barely brushing against his. There was no turning back now. The kiss was slow, tender, filled with everything they had both been hiding. It was reckless, yes, but it was real, and it was undeniable. When they broke apart, Damien couldn't help but smile, a mixture of fear and excitement flooding his chest. "I hate that you're right," Damien whispered, his voice shaky. Jackson laughed softly. "You'll get used to it," he said, pulling Damien into his arms, the moment heavy with everything unsaid. Chapter 6. Breaking Point. Damien was starting to lose his grip. Every time Jackson appeared, it felt like the earth tilted under his feet. It was supposed to be simple, just a little fun, a way to escape the rules that bound him. But somewhere along the way, it became more than that. Every touch, every glance, every word Jackson spoke seemed to unravel him more and more. That afternoon, as they sat in the park, the air was thick with tension. Jackson was throwing pebbles into the fountain, trying to hit the farthest edge, but his eyes kept drifting to Damien, who was too aware of the silence between them. "What's the matter, Saint? You've been awfully quiet lately. Cat got your tongue," Jackson teased, tossing another pebble into the water. Damien let out a short laugh, though it was strained. "I'm thinking," he muttered, his fingers running through his hair nervously. "I don't know what to make of this. Of us." Jackson stopped mid-throw, turning to look at him, his smirk softening into something more serious. "You mean the fact that you're not sure whether you want to kiss me again or punch me in the face?" Jackson said, his voice dripping with playful challenge. Damien felt his heart race. "It's not that," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's this feeling I get when I'm with you. It's not just physical. I don't know what's happening, Jackson, but it's not simple. It's like I'm falling, but I'm too afraid to land." Jackson's expression shifted, his teasing smile replaced by something gentler, more vulnerable. He moved closer, close enough that Damien could feel the heat radiating off him. "You don't have to be afraid of falling with me," Jackson said quietly. "I don't bite. Unless you want me to." His grin was back, but there was something in his eyes, something unguarded. Damien felt the pull again, stronger than before. "I don't know what I want anymore," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. The vulnerability in Jackson's gaze made it impossible to look away. "Then let's figure it out together," Jackson said, his hand gently brushing against Damien's. The warmth of his touch sent a shiver down Damien's spine. "But if it helps, I think I'm falling too. So maybe we can fall together." Damien's breath hitched, the words landing in his chest like a quiet explosion. "You're crazy," he whispered, unable to hide the smile tugging at his lips. "You're completely insane." Jackson leaned in, his lips brushing Damien's ear as he whispered, "Maybe. But if you think this is crazy, you should see what happens when I get my hands on you." Damien's pulse quickened, but his laughter bubbled up uncontrollably. "You really know how to make a guy feel nervous and excited at the same time," he said, shaking his head. "Good," Jackson said, his smile mischievous. "Because that's exactly what I'm going for." He leaned in and kissed Damien softly, their lips barely touching at first, but then with more intensity. When they finally broke apart, Damien's breath was shallow, his body alive with the fire Jackson had sparked. Okay, Damien said, trying to play it cool, but his voice was laced with emotion. "I'll admit it. I'm not going anywhere, am I?" Jackson's grin was wide and full of mischief. "Nope," he said with a wink. "And neither are you." Chapter 7. The Test. Damien couldn't get the feel of Jackson's lips out of his head. Every moment since their kiss felt like it was burning through him. He told himself it was just a moment, a fleeting lapse in his judgment, but deep down, he knew it wasn't. He couldn't stop thinking about Jackson. He just wanted him. The next day at school, Jackson spotted him in the hallway and walked over with a grin. "Hey, Saint, how's the holy life?" he teased, nudging him with his shoulder. Damien rolled his eyes, feeling the heat rise in his cheeks. "I don't know, Jackson. How's the bad boy life treating you?" His voice was teasing, but there was a nervous edge to it. "Not bad," Jackson replied, leaning in closer, his breath warm against Damien's ear. "But I think it's a little more fun when I'm around you." He stepped back, giving Damien a wink. "Don't tell me you're thinking of becoming a good boy all of a sudden?" Damien hesitated, looking down at the floor, his thoughts tangled. "Maybe I should be good. For once." Jackson's eyes sparkled with mischief. "You don't have to be good for me, Damien," he said quietly. "Just be you." Then, he paused, softer. "I like you the way you are, even if you're confused." Damien's heart fluttered at the honesty in Jackson's voice. The vulnerability in his words felt like a punch to the chest. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He wanted to say something. But what? Chapter 8. Unraveling. Damien knew the rules. Don't fall for the bad boy. Don't give in to temptation. Don't do anything that could ruin everything you've worked for. But Jackson had a way of slipping through the cracks in his mind, his heart. At lunch, they sat together, sneaking glances at each other across the table. Damien was the first to speak, his voice unsure but full of quiet desire. "I'm not sure I can keep pretending like this isn't real." Jackson's eyes locked onto his, intense and serious. "Then stop pretending," he said, his hand brushing against Damien's under the table. "I want this. I want you." Damien swallowed hard, feeling the pulse in his throat. "What if I'm not what you think I am?" he asked, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "What if I'm not ready for this?" Jackson leaned in, his face close enough for Damien to smell the faint trace of his cologne. "Damien, I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to be here with me. That's all." The weight of his words hit Damien like a storm, and for the first time he felt like maybe, just maybe, it was okay to feel what he felt. Maybe he didn't need all the answers. Maybe he just needed to feel. Chapter 9. Tangled Emotions. Damien was getting lost in Jackson. He could feel the pull every time they were together, every glance, every touch. But when they weren't together, the doubt started creeping in. What if this was just a phase? What if Jackson was just playing around? That evening, he found himself standing outside Jackson's house, his fingers trembling against his phone as he debated whether or not to text. Should he do this? Should he let himself get this close to the fire? But before he could decide, Jackson appeared at the door, leaning casually against the frame. "Didn't think you'd show up," Jackson said, his voice light but his eyes intense. "I wasn't sure if I should," Damien admitted, his voice tinged with vulnerability. "But I can't stop thinking about you." Jackson stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "Then stop thinking. Just feel," he said, his voice low and sultry. Before Damien could respond, Jackson kissed him. It was slow, searching, and it left Damien breathless. When they broke apart, Jackson smiled softly. "That's what you needed, wasn't it?" Damien nodded, his heart racing. "Yeah. But I'm still scared." Jackson cupped his face gently. "I know. But I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere." Chapter 10. Into the Unknown. The weeks went by, each one more intense than the last. Damien found himself falling deeper and deeper into the world Jackson had drawn him into, and the more he fell, the more the world around him seemed to crumble. His family, his friends, his faith, they all seemed like distant echoes now. One night, they were walking through the quiet streets after a secret date. Damien felt lightheaded, as if he were floating in some kind of dream. "I can't believe I'm doing this," Damien muttered, his voice filled with awe. "What's the matter, Saint?" Jackson teased, nudging him playfully. "Getting cold feet?" Damien looked at him, his face flushed with emotion. "It's just, I never thought I'd be here, with you, like this." Jackson's expression softened, his usual teasing demeanor gone. "I didn't think you'd let me in," he said quietly, his voice sincere. "But I'm glad you did." Damien stopped walking, his hand reaching for Jackson's. "I don't know what's going to happen, Jackson. But right now, I just want to be with you." Jackson pulled him closer, kissing him again, the kiss deep and meaningful. "Then let's just be here, Damien. Right now, that's all that matters." Chapter 11. Secrets Unraveled. It was late when Damien arrived at school the next morning, still wrapped in the warmth of Jackson's kiss. But as he stepped into class, reality hit him like a cold wave. There were whispers, glances exchanged, and a sense of unease in the air. Damien's heart sank. Jackson wasn't there yet, but the tension in the room was palpable. As the bell rang, the teacher walked in, but Damien couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He felt exposed, like his secret had somehow leaked. At lunch, Jackson slid into the seat across from him, giving him a playful grin. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Damien sighed, his hands running through his hair. "I don't know. Something feels off. People are talking. They know something's up." Jackson's smile faltered. "Let them talk. They don't know anything." Damien met his gaze, feeling the weight of his words. "But they might." Before Jackson could reply, a familiar voice called from across the room. "I heard you two are an item now." It was Emma, one of their classmates, standing by the door with a smug look. Damien's stomach dropped. "Emma," he started, but she cut him off. "Relax, Damien. No need to hide it. The whole school knows." Jackson stood up, his voice suddenly cold. Then they know nothing, Emma. And if you keep spreading rumors, you'll find out just how little they know. Emma raised her hands in mock surrender, walking away with a smirk. Damien watched her go, his mind racing. What if she's right? Chapter 12. Close Call. The days following the rumors were tense. Damien couldn't escape the stares, the whispers, the questioning looks from everyone around him. He felt like he was living in a fishbowl. But Jackson was with him, as always. At least in those quiet moments when it was just the two of them, everything felt normal. Everything felt right. One evening, Jackson drove them to a small, secluded park, away from everyone. The world outside felt distant, muffled. They sat on the hood of the car, looking up at the sky. "I hate that they're talking about us," Damien admitted, his voice low. Jackson nudged him with his elbow. "Who cares? Let them talk. We're not here for their approval, are we?" Damien smiled despite himself. "No, I guess not." Jackson's hand found his, their fingers intertwining. "Exactly. It's just us. You and me." Damien squeezed his hand, feeling the warmth of Jackson's touch settle deep within him. But as he looked around the empty park, his heart tightened. But what if they never stop talking? What if we can't be us? Jackson's eyes softened, and he leaned in close, their foreheads touching. "Then we'll face it together. Always together." Chapter 13. Temptation. Damien couldn't remember the last time he'd felt this confused. Every time he was around Jackson, he felt this pull, a magnetic attraction he couldn't ignore. And every time they kissed, every time Jackson touched him, it was like his world tilted just a little more. It was a Friday night when Jackson invited him over to his place for the first time. Damien had hesitated, his heart pounding at the thought. He wasn't sure he was ready for what might come next, but he couldn't resist. Jackson's room was dimly lit, cozy, and smelled faintly of his cologne. Damien sat on the bed, his hands resting in his lap, unsure of what to do with them. Jackson stood by the door, looking at him with those dark, intense eyes. "You sure about this?" Damien swallowed, his voice shaky. "I think so. I want to be with you, Jackson. But I don't know what I'm doing." Jackson walked over, kneeling in front of him. He reached for Damien's hand, gently coaxing him to meet his gaze. "You don't need to know. You just have to trust me." "Trust us?" Damien's heart skipped a beat. "I do. I trust you." Jackson smiled softly, leaning in. "Then let's take it slow. We don't have to rush. Just be with me." Damien nodded, his pulse quickening as Jackson's lips brushed against his. Everything else melted away. It was just the two of them, and for once, that felt enough. Chapter 14. New Territory. As the days passed, Damien felt like he was losing himself. It wasn't a bad thing, but it was overwhelming. Jackson was always there, a constant in his life now, and with him came a rush of emotions he wasn't sure how to handle. One afternoon, they walked through the park, hands brushing against each other in a secretive but comfortable way. "Do you ever think about the future?" Damien asked, his voice unusually soft. Jackson raised an eyebrow, glancing over at him. "The future? I try not to. I like living in the moment, you know." Damien smiled faintly. "I don't know if I can. Not with everything happening around us. It's hard not to think about what's next." Jackson stopped walking, turning to face him. "Whatever happens, Damien, we'll handle it. Together. I don't have all the answers, but I have you. And that's enough." Damien's heart fluttered at his words. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of calm. "Yeah. I think that's enough, too." Chapter 15. Doubts and Desires. Damien hadn't seen Jackson all weekend. School was tense, the air thick with unspoken words. He couldn't help but wonder if Jackson had been avoiding him. Was he second-guessing everything too? At lunch on Monday, he finally spotted him across the cafeteria, sitting alone, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something unreadable. Damien's heart clenched in his chest as he made his way over. "Hey," he said, trying to keep his voice casual as he sat down next to Jackson. Jackson didn't look up. "Hey," he muttered, stirring his drink with a straw, avoiding eye contact. "Jackson," Damien started, his heart racing. "What's going on? You've been acting weird." Jackson finally looked at him, his expression guarded. "I don't know, man. I feel like I'm pushing you into something. I don't want to be that guy, you know? The one who ruins everything." Damien's eyes softened. "You're not ruining anything. You never did. I'm just scared too, okay?" Jackson blinked, his expression softening. "You scared?" Damien chuckled lightly, despite the nervousness crawling up his spine. "Yeah, me. But I'm here, Jackson. And I'm not going anywhere." Jackson smiled, a little more relaxed now. "Good. Because I don't think I could do this without you." Chapter 16. Vulnerability. Damien couldn't keep the walls up any longer. Jackson had chipped away at them, piece by piece, and now he stood there, fully exposed. For the first time in his life, he allowed someone to see him, truly see him, and Jackson didn't turn away. They were at the lake, the sun setting behind them. It was the perfect moment, quiet, intimate. "I don't want to hide anymore," Damien confessed, his voice trembling slightly. "I don't want to be scared of what people think. I just want to be with you." Jackson's hand found his touch firm and steady. "You don't have to hide. Not with me." Damien smiled, his chest tight with emotion. "I think I'm falling for you, Jackson." Jackson's eyes softened, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Then let yourself fall. I'll catch you." Chapter 17. Acceptance. It wasn't perfect. They both had their fears, their doubts, their moments of uncertainty. But in each other, they had found something real, something worth fighting for. They sat together, watching the stars, the silence between them comfortable. Damien leaned his head on Jackson's shoulder, closing his eyes. "You were right," Damien murmured. "We don't need to have it all figured out." Jackson wrapped an arm around him, pulling him closer. "Nope. All we need is each other." And for the first time in a long time, Damien believed. Chapter 18. The Test. The following week brought its own set of challenges. Rumors about Damien and Jackson swirled even more, and the tension was suffocating. Damien found himself wondering if it was worth it. Was it worth the risk of losing everything for something that felt so right? They met in secret again, late at night in Jackson's car, parked near the edge of the city where no one would find them. Jackson had a way of making him forget the world, even for just a few hours. "I'm tired of this, Jackson," Damien said, his voice full of frustration. "I want to be open, but it feels like the whole school is waiting for us to mess up." Jackson squeezed his hand, his expression serious. "We're not messing up. We're just finding our way. It's not easy, but we're in this together, right?" Damien nodded, feeling the weight of Jackson's words sink in. "Yeah, together." But the next day, things changed. Someone had snapped a picture of them in the park, an innocent moment, a shared smile, but it was enough to ignite a wildfire. Damien's phone blew up with notifications, and he knew the inevitable had arrived. The rumors had crossed a line. Chapter 19. The Breaking Point. By Monday, the situation had escalated. Everyone was talking. Students who had once looked at Damien with indifference now eyed him with curiosity. He couldn't escape the whispers or the stares. It felt like the walls were closing in on him, suffocating him. At lunch, Jackson wasn't there. Damien sat at his usual spot, but it felt like everything was different. He stared at his phone, the screen flashing with messages, some supportive, but most cruel. He felt his breath catch when he spotted Jackson walking into the cafeteria, his gaze immediately locking with Damien's. Jackson's face was unreadable, but his eyes held something more, a flicker of worry, of doubt. Before Damien could say anything, Emma appeared, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "So, Damien, you and Jackson, huh? What's that like? Hiding it for so long?" Damien's heart pounded in his chest. He opened his mouth to respond, but Jackson was already standing up, cutting in before the tension could escalate further. "Leave it, Emma," Jackson said firmly, his voice steady. "We don't owe anyone an explanation." Damien watched, his heart pounding in his ears as Emma rolled her eyes and walked away. The crowd buzzed with whispers, but Jackson stayed at his side, not moving, not flinching. "I'm sorry," Damien whispered. Jackson shook his head, pulling Damien into a tight hug. "No, don't apologize. We're not sorry for who we are. And we never will be." Chapter 20. A New Beginning. After the storm came the calm. The rumors continued, but something had shifted. The weight of the world no longer felt so heavy. Jackson and Damien had faced their fears together, and now they stood stronger for it. It was a Saturday evening, and they were back in the park, sitting side by side in comfortable silence. The world was still out there, still full of questions and uncertainty, but for now, they were okay. "I think we can do this," Damien said, breaking the silence. "We can survive all the rumors, all the talk. As long as we have each other." Jackson turned to him, his expression soft and full of affection. "We will. I believe in us." Damien smiled, feeling his heart swell. "Yeah, me too." Jackson leaned in and kissed him, the kiss soft but full of promise. When they pulled away, Damien knew that no matter what came next, they'd face it together. And in that moment, it was enough.